Business Cycle in the 21st Century, The Cause and the Cure. With robber barons and captains of industry desperately trying to escape their responsibilities, white working-class men were encouraged to acquire on their own better means of engagement, first in a factory, and then in a business. By the end of the 20th century, white women were recognized as human beings and were to be exploited like poor white men. Somehow, everyone else also found their way through the golden age of self-enslavement into the human centipede. As we have all become efficient slaves, economic crises occur more frequently. Much has happened since 1819, when Jean-Charles Leonard de Sismondi wrote Nouveau Principes d'économie politique, in which he identified the cause of business cycles as overproduction and underconsumption, and blamed wealth inequality. Today there are a number of different verdicts. Finney, Kydland and Edward C. Prescott argue that the business cycle is due to random changes in the total productivity factor. For Raymond Vernon, this is the life cycle of marketable goods. Michael Kalecki points the finger at politicians. Richard M. Goodwin channeled the mind of Karl Marx to point out the increased bargaining power of workers, which leads to a breakdown in capital accumulation. Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek come down the hill shouting that this is excessive credit issuance by the banks. When Henry George speaks out and says that fluctuating land prices are the root of most business cycles, everyone can help but laugh to tears. In short, there is no consensus. Every dominant doctrine compresses the love affair with untamable disillusions. In the attempt of debunking the whys and hows of the business cycle, moralists and theorists have been trapped in what capitalism is driven by and how it evolves. Economic bubbles and busts have made us all paranoid and frustrated. Richard Goodwin ties together Marx, Keynes, Schumpeter, MKS, to convince us that there are recurring, unavoidable transient period. Karl Marx argues that the selfishness of the capitalists ensured that from time to time, the system would break down. Maynard Keynes' prescription: when all hell breaks loose, the government must step in by handing out money to the labor reserve army to ease the pain and come up with huge plans to reduce their anxiety while keeping them fit. While Joseph Schumpeter reassures that sooner or later, someone will find something new to redirect our envy and create a new rush. But the 21st century business cycle puzzle, in its sophistication, rests on a key feature of the new paradigm shift. Although cyclical volatility has become more dramatic as awareness has grown, as satellites and the internet have extended communications worldwide, the depth of recessions has decreased significantly. During the subprime mortgage crisis, or when COVID-19 rocked the world, people were not forced to live in absolute poverty, like they were during the Spanish flu or the Great Depression. Ordinary mortals acquiring and possessing their means of engagement, participation, or involvement has become a global culture. Instead of a large reserve army of labor, the robber barons and captains of greedy plot industry has actually produced surplus privateers or ready entrepreneurs. When we analyze the nature of trade today, we can see that there are more enterprises than businesses. Economies are shifting from the industrial sector to the service sector. And so, the 21st century business cycle is caused by the maneuvers of developed countries to mitigate overefficiency. The foregoing explanations are a subset of this. The oxycodone of the developed nations, running high deficits, and of its people, racking up households' debts, added to third world over-inefficiency, make it impossible to avoid a rougher sail. The cure: ethosism? The psychological contract between the laboring class and the captains of industry has remained the same: rule of distribution of wealth and power for centuries, even though the premise has long lost its validity. For the wrong reasons, capital is still defined as the part of wealth which was devoted to obtaining further wealth, as Alfred Marshall stated. But in the 21st century, capital is that means which is interlocked to obtain wealth through interaction with others. Ergo, instead of the average number of hours of work, the quality of the means tied up in an enterprise to produce a commodity or provide a service establishes relative prices. It should be noted that humans have gone from which today is neither sustenance nor sentimental, rather proximity value underlining propensity of action that a business just as an enterprise seek to profit from it. What all this means: money is not the sole source of all surplus. Labor is not, either. Henceforth, surplus distribution ought to be from each according to his or her means, not to each according to his or her needs. The Dupoid's due measures reward arrangement in nominal term for the ones labeled as labor and percentage of the surplus for the moneyers lost at raison d'etre. The notion of wage ought to be thrown out of our collective conscience. No postpone the dream in the form of equity or even commission, but the percentage of the surplus for all should be the new rules. In Marx's way, S plus V plus C becomes simply S plus C. On the basis of this conception, the rate of profit is not solely for the individual so-called capitalist, but everyone who got into the game of profiteering by tying in their means of engagement, participation, or involvement in the business or enterprise. Labor is no longer viewed as a cost, but one of the profiteers as it ought to be. In this context, the working class is no longer a cost, but one of the profiteers as it should be. Consequently, ethosism cuts out the middleman, the state, from the wealth distribution process. And all the more, so since the state is the guarantor of unjust barriers and wealth inequality, by being in capitalism the Robin Hood, who steals from the poor and gave to the rich. Robespierre in communism, prison warden in socialism, and Dracula for third world countries, regardless of the economic and political system adopted. It will slow the proliferation of billionaires while spreading prosperity based on the right argument. It will also put an end to the cheapening of human experience, causing severe environmental damage threatening our own existence. Joe M. Sekimonyo. For more information visit www.sekimonyo.com.